1, 2. There you go. Good evening. Oh no. Still go. Here I am just trying to teach Creek and talking like Steve. It's still low. I heard about 4 different replies, but they're all correct. They're all correct. I asked you how you were doing, and somebody said, very good, hit him out here. He said, it's still graduates. That means, yes, I'm doing good. Somebody else said, I heard. But they're all correct. And you know, that's the thing about Mvskoke language. Even though I'm here as an instructor, the Mvskoke language is so complex and has so many different variables that I don't want to tell you that what I'm teaching you is the only way. It's not. Okay, there's a lot of ways to talk to one another. And when we hear people talk to one another, we hear them say things, and we learn from them and another way to respond. So when I heard those, that's what I thought about. And I always say that. There's no perfect way to teach it or learn it. All I can tell you is the way that I know, and even I know different ways, but I try to stay and keep it simple. I want to welcome you all back again this week, and we're glad to be here. I'm glad to see everybody coming back. I think there's a great big interest in our language, and I want to say that when I say Mvskoke language, I'm not talking about Creek, or I'm not talking about Seminole. I'm talking about the Mvskoke language, and that's what we all speak. There's no Seminole language. There is no Creek language. 300 years ago, there wasn't such a thing as a Creek. There wasn't no such thing as a Seminole. We were all Mvskoke. We speak, we live in different areas of the country, and for the people that we talk to here, we're mostly talking to Oklahoma Creeks and Oklahoma Seminoles, and we all speak the same language. You might hear variables from one area to the other, but that's not dialect, that's just differences. And because even in the Creek Nation, people talk a little different over in Eufaula than they do over in Tulsa or Okmulgee or Wetumpka. So people want to use that word dialect. There's no such thing in my book as dialect. We all speak Mvskoke. Nagin mali langi kuchinoa, but tizani punaka Mvskoke punaka maruna. Terangisin maktuaya. Good. I said, as I speak and I speak this Mvskoke, there's no difference. We all speak the same language. There's a language program at the Mvskoke Creek Nation. They're doing good work. They're doing great work. But there's also a language program at College of the Mvskoke Nation. And they're doing great work. They're teaching people and they're learning. And there is or was a program at the Seminole Nation language program doing great work. I was proud to see little bitty kids talking Mvskoke. But the thing is, I'm always a proponent of consistency. People say, they want new words for new things, and I do too. I want new words for new things. But I don't think anybody has the right or authority to create words without the inclusion of all those other entities, both government, people from both governments, Seminole Nation and Creek Nation. So I think that we're at a point that sooner or later we're going to have to get together. I see a few new words coming out. I think at the College of the Mvskoke Nation, because they're wanting to expand our language, and that's great that they want to, but I think that it's going to need to include the Seminole people, and it needs to include people from all areas that speak this language. I'm going to go back to what I was talking about a while ago about no Seminole or no Creek. How many of you go to Indian church? Okay. How many of you, is it a home city or down home? Where do you go to church?
I go to Chicago.
Chicago. What church? Deep Forky-Lubbock. I used to know a man from there, Thompson Billy. You remember him? He was a pastor for many years down at Thompson Billy. Anybody else go to a traditional Indian church? Where do you go? Jones? Okay. Some of you go to Gloria. Okay. And they use a lot of, I guess, Mvskoke words over there. A lot of Mvskoke people, but I know that there's a lot of other people as well. I got a lot of relatives in that church. Jimmy Fish, and Pinky, and Woody. They're all my cousins.
That's my Sunday school teacher.
Who, Woody? Is that right? Yeah. He's my relative on my grandma's side, on the Chucko side. And Jimmy's my first cousin. Her mom and my dad are brother and sister. And who else did I say? Oh, Pinky and Woody, they're close related, you know. And my grandma was in the Chucko Lonnie family, so that's where I come from. But the point I'm trying to make, when we go to church at Deep Forky-Lubbock, but let's use a better example. Sand Creek you follow, y'all know that church? Close to Mvskoke? Okay, there's a church over there called Sand Creek you follow. It sits inside Seminole Nation. When you go there, and they sing Mvskoke, I'll be out like this. And they're not singing Seminole, they're not singing Creek. We came together as Mvskoke Christians to sing those songs. How many of you go stone dance? Okay. What do you go to stone dance? Huh? Was you at Alabama Saturday? I was there. When we sang those songs, we danced with Gar Creek people, we danced with New Tulsa people, we danced with Arbica people, we danced with Alabama people. It's Mvskoke song ground. It's not Seminole. Some of them might be located, I say some of them, one of them, Gar Creek, located inside Seminole Nation. And then we got the rest of them all located within Creek Nation. But when we all get together, we're not Creek and Seminole people. We're Mvskoke people observing our traditional religion. Same way with the Indian churches. We're not Creek or Seminole, we're singing Mvskoke songs. So I always try to stress that because I don't want people to get confused and think that it's either Seminole or Creek. You know, I said this last time for those. How many of you were not here last time? Okay, good, new ones. One of the statements I made was that the word Seminole is not even a Mvskoke word, it's a Spanish word. And it's not even really a Spanish word, it's a variation of the Spanish word. When the Mvskokes and some of the freedmen and some of the Nachis, they all got together and ran away from European civilization. They went into the Everglades of Florida and they joined up with the Mvskokes and some of those, and they all became one people. And the Spanish came along and said, what are you doing here? And they said, we got away, run away from those people. Spanish people said, oh, you're Cimarrons. That means wild people. You're Cimarrons. Mvskoke people don't have no R in their name, in their vocabulary. So they said, what did he call us? He said, Shimalone. Shimalone. And for a long time, Shimalone was the word, Shimalone. And then somebody got fancy later on and changed it to Shimalone. It's really Cimarron, Simalone, and now it's Seminole. Creek people, 300 years ago, we weren't Creek people. Creek ain't even an Indian word. We can't say R, so how are we going to call ourselves Creek people? There was those Europeans that came along and said, look at all these people. They always live around the creeks. They got all their establishments and their towns along creeks. So they must be creek people. We'll call them creek people. You know, they're farmers, they make agriculture, and they have to have that water, so they have to be around creek. They're dependent on water. So we'll call them creek people. So that's where creek and Seminole come from. That's not what we call ourselves. Mvskoke. That's what we say. That means the Mvskoke people. But because we separated, some of us went into Florida, some of us stayed around there, some of us were up near Tennessee, some down by Georgia, some in Alabama, and several of them did the same thing those people did that went to Florida. They went to Texas. There was a group called the Alabama Coshada, which, by the way, they were here this weekend visiting us. I work for Alabama Coshada Tribal Camp. They were here visiting us in Alabama, had a ceremonial dance this weekend, and there were guests out there. That was a pretty cool deal. But they went out there, there's 15 of them. And that's what they're going to continue to do, that cultural exchange. But they have their own, the Alabama, Coshada, Texas, they have the language that is probably more close to a dialect. They had the language that they had when they left. They still got it going on down in Texas. They preserved the language. The Alabama Wasani that came to Oklahoma, we blended with all the other creeks and started speaking their language. So that's how the Mvskoke language that we know today, it's not the pure language that our great-grandparents knew 300 years ago. The language that we speak now is a mixed language that evolved from that confederacy, what they call the Creek Confederacy, when they all came together, and they used to speak a little different from each other, but they made it into one language. So that's what we call the Mvskoke language. Okay, having said that, I'm going to get kind of how many of you got your papers from last lesson? I didn't bring the extras, but I want to go over that and review that a little bit. We talked about one of the first things that we do as Mvskoke people is when we see each other, we're going to have a conversation. What do we do first? We introduce ourselves, right? Just like we did today. I said, Mvskoke, and some of you gave the different answers. So last time we talked about greetings, introductions, and initiating conversation. We talked about typically how we greet one another and how we initiate conversation. And the first thing we do is ask each other a question. Mvskoke. Mvskoke means, is all well? There's nothing wrong, is there? Mvskoke. And what it kind of like, we use it to allude to is to say, how are you? Mvskoke, how are you? And typically, we have 2 or 3 answers that we can answer with. But in our lesson, we learned, Mvskoke. When I asked you, is nothing amiss? And the answer is Mvskoke. And that means nothing is wrong, or all is well. But you can also answer, a lot of people answer, Mvskoke. And that means all is well. He just means good. Chi means it is. So you can say Mvskoke, and that means it is good. And when 2 people aren't very well acquainted, maybe they don't know each other, but they met for the first time with their native. And let me give you an example. We've asked a lot of questions from student people, but that's our way of getting to know them. Mvskoke. I can choose you, baby. Sue? Gina? questions. We kind of sound like nosy people. We ask each other a lot of questions, but that's how we get to know one another. That's how our grandparents did. Stay in Mvskoke. When they meet somebody new, especially children, stay who's your mother? Stay who are your parents? And if you meet that young person, young man, young girl, and they'll say, and when I was small, I would hear that from a lot of elders, and I'd say, Liza Beaver, what's it for you? And I told them her name is Liza Beaver. And they'd say, Lord, they'd say, is that so? And they may not recognize her name, so they take it a step further and say, in other words, who are your grandparents? One side of my grandparents were Indian, and the other side I had a white grandma. So when they asked me that, I knew they were talking about my Indian side. I'd say, Chortki Beaver, Daniel Beaver, Polly Beaver, what I said was my grandfather was Daniel Beaver, and my grandmother was Polly Beaver, because though they were very well-known people, did you ever hear them? That was my grandfather. And I knew that a lot of people knew them. So when I answered that way, they'd say, oh. In other words, it sure is. And then that's where, once you get acquainted and they know who you are, that's how you get to know each other, by identifying you with your family. Or they might say, no, once they find out who you are, they'll say, no, in other words, what's your clan? No, but back in those days, it was important. Your clan identity was important, because that could tell you if that person you just met is your clan grandmother, grandpa, your clan uncle, aunt, your clan brother or sister, or your clan little brother or sister. When the way it was taught to me, my mother, of course, was Bird clan, and that's what I was, and her mother, because we follow matrilineal. So when somebody said, no, I say, in other words, Bird, Foswaki. So when I would say that, they would identify with their own clan and their own family, and if they had grandfathers, say for example on the patrilineal side, or their dad, if their dad was Bird, but their mom wasn't, but I was Bird, they'd say, you're my daddy. Ain't they? Remember that? I'm Daddy Booster. That means you're my father. Chuck my father. You're my father's clan, so you're my father. Sometimes age didn't matter, depending on what your clan was. Everyone back in those days knew what their clan was. You had to know what your clan was, because that's where we got our cultural identity. With so many people intermarrying these days, a lot of people have lost the importance of their clan identity. Not intentionally, but it's just not important to one another. Because back in those days, we didn't intermarry. I'm the product of a white grandma myself. My dad was half white, my mom was full white. But sometimes when one parent was white and they were being raised in a way that wasn't traditional, it wasn't important to know, and some people had forgotten what their clan was. There's also another way that to identify yourself. It's a political designation, and it's for the Creeks, it's called tribal towns. For the Seminoles, it's bands. And they would ask you, nugget, or on the clan, the word for when they ask you is, they'd say, not Obi, so that meant clan are you, but they'd also say, nugget, chimalegi, chimalegi. There's two ways to say it. But with the tribal town, for those of you that may not be familiar with Mvskoke Creeks, I told you they weren't always Creek people. They were originally Mvskoke people. But we came from many, many tribal towns. It's almost like there was a lot of tribes in the southeast that spoke a similar language. But So everyone has a tribal town, and you're born into it the same way, natural innate. But it's a political designation. And if someone asks you, Nugget, Chimigo, that means what is your little town? What is your town? And you would answer with myself, oh, Tugabatsogi, I'm Tugabachi. Tugabatsogi, right? And some tribal towns were closely affiliated with other tribal towns, and so sometimes that created kinship in itself. The common law among our ancestors was that you didn't marry within your clan. If somebody was the same clan as you, say me, for example, and I met another woman that was our clan, it's considered incest in the traditional way to marry your sister. Was that your sister? So that was highly observed. I don't think anybody cares anymore. But Cree Nation changed their law back in 1979. The Constitution, the old Constitution, representation was by tribal town. They changed it to districts, and a lot of people are losing their tribal town identity. We're getting hung up here. Let me move on. Another common question is, Ishtaman Legitskiwa. In order to identify you, to become acquainted with you, Ishtaman Legitskiwa. Anybody know what I just said? Where do you live? Ishtaman Legitskiwa. And then I would answer with, Utanka Lega Eagles. And that person then would identify you with people that they know in Utanka. Oh, no. Oh, it sure is what they're saying. And then their mind starts working. And they got a cousin that lives in Wetumpka, or they had an old grandma that used to live in Wetumpka. Melindy Dali Gichidoa, in other words, Melindy that has passed away, did you know her? And I'd say, oh no, my touch was yours. And they're saying, it sure is, that was my hand. That's how Indian people, they get acquainted with one another by asking questions and then identifying one another. That's kind of what we talked about last time. We were just talking about getting acquainted with one another so that we could have something in common. That's how we start talking, by getting something in common. A while ago we talked about somebody told me they went to Deep Fork, Columbia. That was our home church. And I put something out there to make a common bond between us. And that is that I used to know their old pastor over there. I don't know that there was a lady named Kobe Sinclair. A lady that I thought, you remember her, Kobe? Is that right? And she had William Jr., same age as me. Yeah, same age. We used to go to the Baptist Association. Every year I'd see Junior with his mom. And I guess she was a single mother because it was just always him and her. Oh, is that right? Okay. Is Junior still on? Is that right? Okay. See there? You see what we're doing there? We're making connections. Now she knows that I know Junior. He's the same age as me. I knew Kobe. Kobe was my mom's new friend. Thompson Billy was a pastor. I guess I probably knew more people there, but that's the only people I remember. That's a pretty good distance from our house, so we didn't get to visit often, but I always like to go there. So that's how we get acquainted. That's how we get acquainted. And that's how most Kobe people do. And I think it's an Indian cultural thing because I think that's how they do it in other tribes. So I trust that you took your work home with you and you were able to study and see how we get acquainted so that we can learn to have discourse through language, conversations, and that's how it starts. And it took us a whole lesson to go over these things last month. I want to also, as we go along here, I want to also talk about other things beside our lesson. I understand that we've had some, we've lost some people in the last month or so, very significant people in both tribes. And I understand now that Johnny Markley passed away. Was it today?
Yes.
Today? And his wife was a assistant chief of Seminole Nation one time, Mary Ann. His daughter Nan and Lucy. I knew them for many years, and I'm sad to hear about that. But that was a great resource. Mary Ann and Johnny, I could sit there and talk for a long time because they both spoke Mvskoke. I would go to what they call OAP, Older Americans Program, where they had lunch, and I'd sit and talk with them. Johnny was, if you knew Johnny, he was a very cynical guy. He was one of these kind of guys. He didn't smile often, and he was always on your toes with him, but he was a good guy. If you ever got to like him, he was a good man. If you didn't like him, you better watch out. But that's the way they were. Mary Ann was always happy, always had a smile on her face, and I'm sorry to hear about that. We also had a loss, which is, the lady's not really a Creek, but she's very significant among the Creek people because her husband was a traditional leader, John Crocker's wife, Vivian. And I understand they're having a wake service here at Eisenhower Funeral Home tonight, and they're having one in Mvskoke tomorrow at the Salt Creek. Is it Baptist? Who told me that? Salt Creek Methodist. Oh, Salt Creek Methodist Church. And then her funeral is going to be Wednesday at Salt Creek, I assume. And it's very traditional people. So John passed away several months ago, and now Vivian took her journey. And so we hate to see those people go. But we've been noticing that a lot lately. We're having a lot of people go on. But that's the way it works. That's what, but while they're here and while they're with us, they teach us things and we learn those things. Real quickly, for those of you this is the first night, you probably wonder, what makes him a teacher? What makes him the person to go to for these lessons? I'm going to give you a real short history. I was born in 1954, and back in those days, there wasn't no big Creek Nation, there wasn't no big Choctaw Nation, there wasn't no big Seminole Nation. There was just people. There was Creek people, Seminole people, and we were just out there. There wasn't no Constitution. We didn't have no complex. We had a chief named Bill McIntosh, but he was a hefty-looking guy that the president appointed. So we didn't have a government. He's a good man, but he wasn't what it is these days. But anyway, I was born in the east of Wetumpka, Oklahoma. My grandfather, when I was born, was a pastor of St. Creek Baptist Church, and his grandma, my grandma, was woman's leader. And they both spoke together. They spoke only Creek. She spoke pure Creek only. She never made one sentence in English. She would use single words, but she did not speak English at all. My grandpa was formerly, before I was born, Speaker of Ceremonial Ground. And so he was a preacher then. And he was very renowned for his speaking abilities. Even though he was a preacher, he was still a medicine man. People used to come for healing medicine, he'd make medicine. And he met a lot of people. He had a lot of experience working for the ceremonial ground and the tribal town for doing their communicating. He was a PR man, if you will, an Indian PR man. He testified in Congress for the creation of Alabama Mvskoke Tribal Town. He was a missionary that traveled to Livingston, Texas, Los Angeles, California, Okeechobee, Florida, and down to the Mvskoke people. And so he was a speaker. And when I was a little boy, when I was born, my mom we all lived in this big log house. But my mom worked through the week because she had to make a living for us. She stayed with my aunt through the week from Sunday night till Friday evening. Then she'd come home. And I stayed with Grandpa and Grandma. And all they spoke was Creek, so that's all I spoke. And of course, Mom knew English, and I could understand what she was saying. But I mostly spoke Creek. And Grandpa taught me some things about the culture, about the traditions. My grandma really liked to teach me about the Christian ways. And we went to church every Wednesday night, every Sunday, Saturday, Sunday. If it was 8th Sunday, we'd go Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If it was 4th Sunday, we'd go Saturday, Sunday night. So we were very steeped in the church. I told you my grandpa was a pastor. So all I did was talk, creep. When I was 4 years old, my grandma said, I think you can learn how to read and write Creek. So she sat down with the first reader and a songbook. And she showed me, and she herself wrote and read Creek. And like out of the Bible, and she would write stuff, teach me how to write, teach me how to say it, and spell it. So when I was 4 years old, I learned how to read and write what I was already speaking. We moved to town when I was almost 6 years old because my grandpa and grandma, and my two sisters and I were in the country. They didn't want us standing out in the cold weather and in the wind and the snow waiting for a school bus. So Grandpa's house that he built, a 2-story log house, it was still there, but my grandma sold part of her allotment, and she had a BIA house built in town. She built it a block away from my white grandma. I didn't hardly know my white grandma, but I got acquainted with her. My white grandma saw me reading and writing in Creek, and she said, if you can do that, you can read and write English. So when I was 5 years old, she took a newspaper or newspapers and taught me how to read and write in English. So I started school. When I started school, I could read and write in English and Creek, and I could speak in both languages. So I've done this all my life. I'm not a trained linguist. I like to share my language. That's all I like to do. I like to do it in a way that you'll understand, so that you'll learn. You may not learn to speak it as well as a lot of people, but if I can share it and help you to be proud of your culture because of what I've taught you, then that's all I want to do. How many of you in here are on my Facebook page? Mvskoke Creek Word of the Day. Okay, we got 6, 8, 10 of you. Okay. I do translations, and sometimes I do phrases, sometimes I just do words. But I do it in a way that I use phonetics. I spell it in the Mvskoke alphabet, and then I spell it out in the English phonetics. I'll show you here in a little bit because I've got examples of it. But anyway, if you're not, and you want to be a part of that Facebook page, just find it. Mvskoke Word. It's not even Greek. It's called Mvskoke Word of the Day. Look for it and tag it in. If you could give me some kind of signal, I get a lot of people who want to join that have no interest in the language. I don't know why they do it, but sometimes I don't allow them. Put a keyword on them. You try to put OKC on there. I'll know what you mean that way, because I don't always remember names. Mvskoke Word of the Day. It's Mvskoke. Mvskoke Word of the Day. I work closely with Realistic Awares, and they're the ones that are sponsoring me right now for these language lessons. And I've been friends with David, Frank, and Jeremy. I've known Jeremy his whole life since he was a baby, and so I've been playing with him for quite a while. So I work with them, and we try to spread the culture. That's what we're trying. They're doing a great job with a lot of things. I just join in on the language aspect. So, having said that, I'm going to take about a 20-minute break, 20, 30 minutes. I think some people, this was supposed to be potluck. Some people brought some food. If they want to, it's always, whether you brought it or not, you're welcome to it. If it's nothing more than a bowl of beans and a spoon, you're welcome to it. So I'm going to take about a 20-minute break. I've got the lesson plans already, and we'll start with it. Okay? Here we go.
Great.